of USA Finally Diversify Law Firm Partners in the United States. My name is Jeremy Pook. I operate Senior Attorney Match. I'm a member of USA 500 Clubs. Senior Attorney Match helps lawyers to sell their law practices. And co-moderating today with attorney Julia Gavrilov. And Julia is of Morit, Hawk, and Hamroff in New York. And Julia, before I formally introduce you, just want to give people a sense of where we're going with this workshop. Very much want to thank USA 500 Clubs. USA 500 Clubs has organized its Turning Point workshops. And the Turning Point has a couple themes to it. One theme is we all know that we've been involved and thrust into the coronavirus pandemic now for over 9 months. And USA 500 Clubs created its Turning Point workshops as a turning point towards, okay, how are we going to turn out of the pandemic? Where are we going with our businesses? In this workshop, we're using the Turning Point in a bit of a different way, which is a look at diversity and inclusion for law firms. As we'll hear from our great guests throughout today's workshop, the diversity and inclusion numbers among partners and law firms in the United States in 2020 is still way below where it should be. And our great guests will be talking about what we can do to improve that. We'll have two themes that our guests will be touching upon, which is why are consumers of legal services, why will they continue demanding diverse legal teams during the 2020s? And our second theme will involve how law firms can accelerate the growth and leadership among their diverse talent. So before we start introducing our guests, Julia, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give some background about yourself before we introduce our first guest, Joel Stern.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julia Gavrilov. I'm counsel to the law firm of Morit, Hawk, and Hamroff, as Jeremy mentioned. Morit, Hawk, and Hamroff is a New York-based firm. I particularly specialize in equipment leasing, secured lending, and complex commercial litigation. I also chair the firm's Women's Initiative, which provides resources, advice, and a platform for the advancement of women at the firm. I've given webinars and lectures on diversity and inclusion and what law firms can do to diversify and keep their talent. And in order for us to make the case to finally diversify law firm partners in the US, we need to first take a look at some of the historical data and statistical analysis of diversity and inclusion and the kinds of challenges that we meet within the legal profession. So we'll first maybe take a quick look to see what stats we're looking at to understand what it is that we're facing right now. So, according to the National Association for Law Placements 2019 Diversity Report, you'll see here a statistical analysis of the percentage of women, people of color, and women of color among the associate ranks and those within the partnership ranks. And as you'll see on the right side, 46.7% of associates are women. 25.4% of associates are people of color, and 14% of associates are women of color. And when you look to the left, the partner statistics, they drop considerably. 24% of partners are women, 9.5% of partners are people of color, and 3.45% are women of color. So as you can see, the numbers are already low at the associate levels, but the numbers are even less representative of partnership levels. Women of color remain the most dramatically underrepresented of all, although nearly doubled since 2009, growing from 1.8% in 2009 to 3.45% in 2019. So that's what's happening between the associate and the partner level, and we need to understand what is driving this drop in representation and how we can get that up. Jeremy.
Great, thank you. So to lead off our discussion about the topic of how, from a turning point standpoint, how can we finally diversify law firm partners in the U.S.? We're really thrilled to introduce a national leader in this space. Joel Stern is the CEO of the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms, NAMWOLF. And Joel, I really would do a disservice by giving a bio description for you yourself. So I'm going to put you on the spot. We'd love to hear a background about you, about NAMWOLF, and then we'll jump into the talking points that we're going to go over with you today. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Julia. It's an honor to be here today. I'll keep my bio short because I'm old, so it's long. I was in-house counsel most of my career, so I was a procurer of outside counsel services and very passionate about diversity and inclusion my entire career. Most recently, I was deputy general counsel at Accenture, where I ran the Americas Legal Group, and I was the COO of the Global Legal Group, tasked with managing outside counsel, but also leading the creation of a diversity and inclusion legal program back in the early 2000s, which I'm proud to say is best in class. I now have the privilege of heading up an organization that is focused on diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. I get to live and breathe D&I 24/7. NAMWOLF is all about diversity and inclusion in the legal profession, but with a focus on supplier diversity, which means in addition to going after of color and females and openly LGBTQ at big law, corporations and law firms should also be reaching out to minority and women-owned law firms across the United States. NAMWOLF is that gourmet kitchen where you get to see these delicacies, these 3,000 lawyers that are part of 195 minority and women-owned law firms, 2 of whom are represented in this call today. And we provide that mechanism for buyers of legal services to get outstanding quality, outstanding value, but also support diversity and inclusion.
Great, thanks so much. So we've got a few talking points that we want to discuss with you, Joel. And one of those, which I think your typical lawyer, consumer of legal services, doesn't necessarily think of data, of diversity data. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today, I mean, we're at this interesting point in U.S. history where D&I, diversity inclusion, is such a big part. Not only in the legal sphere, but and Julia, you're going to be talking about this later today too. I mean, so many different industries, and we'd love for you to touch upon this point here, the continuing importance of diversity data. For private law firms and in-house counsel at Fortune 1000 companies. What are you thinking about at NAMWOLF about this? And what should both consumers and providers of legal services be thinking about their D&I data?
So a confession to make, for most of my career, data was irrelevant, right? I mean, I was always sold on diversity and inclusion because it was the right thing to do. We as lawyers have codes of conduct in several states, including New York and California and Illinois, where we have an obligation not to discriminate in the practice of law. I always saw the normative reasons, the moral reasons for being excited about diversity and inclusion was enough for me to proselytize it to anybody that would listen. But fortunately or unfortunately, I came to the conclusion that no matter how much people want to do it because it's the right thing to do, in order to sell people, you have to sell them on the fact that it's the smart thing to do. And how do you sell them on the smart thing to do? It's data. Data drives decision-making. Data drives people to want to effectuate positive change. When I can go into a large law firm across the United States and say that if you figured out D&I more than your competition, your equity partners are going to make anywhere from 100 to 280,000 more per equity partner, that is going to grab their attention. That is data. When I can get corporations and their affiliated legal groups to understand that if they figure out diversity and inclusion, they can have better financial returns, higher cash flow, more customer wins, more innovative decision making. That's going to drive the corporations and the legal groups to do more. One of my favorites when I talk to in-house legal groups, and this is true with law firms as well, when I tell them if they want their engagement scores to dramatically increase, and engagement is so important because engagement drives productivity, and corporations and legal groups and law firms that have higher engagement are going to be more productive and attract better talent and retain the talent they want to keep. That is data. Back in the early
2000s. 1 second, Joel, I'm really sorry. Sorry for sort of playing Mickey the Dunce here. Engagement. What do you mean by engagement?
Great question. So engagement is something that most corporations and law firms measure. I will distill it into 3 things. Does the employee base say the right things about their environment? Do they strive to do their best each and every day? And do they plan on staying more than 3 to 5 years in their present place of employer? Higher engagement, more productive. So corporations and law firms are measuring engagement almost on a yearly basis, if not more. And this has been done for years. My favorite story about engagement within the Accenture context is back in 2005, the engagement scores in the United States legal team dramatically increased. And I'm patting myself on the back saying what a great boss everybody has. We pay our people too much. I allowed people to work from home before it was vogue and before COVID-19. But when you peel that onion back, the reality is, and this is data, the primary reason our engagement scores dramatically increased is because our legal group saw what we were doing with respect to diversity and inclusion. We made it a programmatic effort. As a result, we had the lowest unmanaged attrition, people leaving on their own in the 2 or 3 years following that. And we were attracting talent that we had never seen before because they were buying into what we were doing with respect to diversity and inclusion.
And could you also elaborate a bit, Joel, on that financial piece? I mean, those were significant 6-figure numbers that you just shared with us in terms of that data piece. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that too, in terms of what you're able to explain to private law firms when it comes to those numbers that you were describing before?
No, great question. So the data comes from many different sources, including the Harvard Business Review, and McKinsey just had a report that came out that showed the analytics of diversity inclusion. It's the smart thing to do. The reason this is so important and taking on increasingly importance with law firms is because the buyer of legal services, corporations, are demanding more diversity. So if you're a Fortune 50 corporation and you are making buying decisions based on law firms that you deem to be doing more with respect to D&I, you're going to drive more revenue towards them, which will lead to higher net income, which will ultimately lead to more profits per partner. And we're starting to see this from corporations. What I always tell people, Jeremy, is for years we've had calls to actions with very little action. What we're seeing as a result of the George Floyd murder and other things that occurred in the middle of this year is we're seeing CEOs talk about this subject and equity partners, managing partners at law firms talk about this subject differently than I've ever heard before. We're hearing white males talk about white male privilege. We're hearing about people talk about unconscious bias. We're hearing the word systemic and institutional change. Law firms are hearing loud and clear from the buyers of legal services that if you don't figure this out, we're not only going to use carrots to drive business to you, but we're going to use sticks to take business away from you. It's that message and the data behind it that's leading law firms to look at this issue differently than they have historically looked at it before.
Wow, very powerful. Great.
So, Joel, excuse me.
3 days, yes.
You were talking about the buyers of services, and what steps can GCs take to show the importance of diversity when purchasing these legal services from private law firms?
Julia, great question. I could answer this in 2 hours, but you've given me just a few minutes, so I'll do my best. Number one, it's better to say nothing and do nothing than to say a lot and do very little. When we see these 12 global banks come out with a letter to the legal community saying, here are the things we're going to demand. More diversity from the law firm, making decisions based on the D&I of law firms, looking for more minority and women-owned law firms we can give the opportunities to, working on the internal aspects of diversity and inclusion, calling it out, but following it up with demonstrable actions that survive both good and bad economic times is critically important. Because when you look at diversity and inclusion in our legal profession, historically it's been ebbs and flows. We need to make it a constant. And one of my favorite authors is Malcolm Gladwell. We need to make what happened in June of this year a tipping point. What does that mean from an in-house legal group? It means you need to create a program. You need to run it like any other strategic imperative you have. It cannot be deemed to be philanthropy, a hobby, a nice to have. You need to have a mission and vision statement articulated. And by the way, not only the corporate legal group, but law firms as well, to make this something very serious and allow it to continue for the long term. You need to have goals. Your employees need to have skin in the game. Every single employee in a corporate legal group and a law firm should have goals with respect to diversity and inclusion. And if you meet and exceed them, you get rewarded. And if you don't, you get punished. And then you need to go after the awards. And I always tell people awards are great for two reasons. Number one, there's an ego fulfillment aspect of it. I don't deny that. But more importantly, when you win those awards, the very next thing the general counsel asks of you is, what are you going to do to raise the bar higher? What are you going to do next year to top this present year? So if you run it like a program and you bake it into your DNA and you make systemic and institutional changes, you have a chance at achieving the objectives you want. And by the way, that's very transferable to the law firm mentality of D&I as well.
And actually, Joel, just to supplement something that you were saying, you see a lot of the trend now of some general counsels of large corporations are taking it a step further and adopting benchmarks to increase diversity within their outside legal teams. Both in 2019, when Intel Corporation announced that they would only retain outside law firms where at least 25% of the equity partners are women, and at least 10% of the firm's U.S. equity partners are underrepresented minorities. PayPal had done something similar where they were tracking the diversity of their outside firms. And JP Morgan Chase, I believe, adopted a Leading with Diversity initiative as well a couple of years ago.
So let me give you, JP Morgan Chase demands that all work be done 50% by diverse lawyers at all levels. Mm-hmm. HP has a 10% holdback, and they don't give the law firm that amount of money unless they meet or exceed the diversity metrics. And Microsoft has a pretty cool program. They not only award the law firms for doing more in this space, they award the in-house counsel who's getting more diversity within Microsoft an award. But your point, Julia, is what in-house needs to do is they need to sign ABA Resolution 113. They need to look at the data. They have to look at the firms that are Mansfield Rule compliant. They need to determine whether they, as an in-house counsel, wants to be Mansfield Rule compliant. They need to ask law firms about origination credit. We know the number one reason women and people of color are not being paid equitably at law firms is because they're not getting credit for origination credit. And when they argue for it, they're either put in their place, which is wrong, or they stay silent, which is wrong. So in-house needs to ask law firms, how do you give origination credit? Is it in perpetuity? Is it for a defined period of time? This is the African-American female that won this business. Why isn't she getting it? You need to ask about client relationship partners. If all of your client relationship partners are white male, you can do what Walmart did and switch them out. Or you can do what we did at Accenture, where if we had a white male client relationship partner we liked, we just asked that person to bring a woman and or minority in as your successor and train them to be your successor. There's so many different things in-house counsel can be doing, but they need to write them down. They need to segment them from internal, big firm, pipeline, and supplier, and they need to treat it like they do anything else that's critically important to them.
Joel, we know the origination credit is a really big theme for you and your role at NamWolf. If you had your druthers and if you were in front of some of the largest corporations in America and you could advise them, they're doing a great job with this carrot and stick that you're talking about, some of the largest ones in the country that you just mentioned, what would you advise them about the origination credit? Could you elaborate on that? In terms of, one of our themes today is, how can law firms accelerate growth and leadership among their diverse talent? It seems like that could be a top down in some respects from the purchasers. So presenting that. Yeah, please.
So years ago, I argued with law firms about the origination credit. I always tell the story about there was a white male partner that got into Accenture in 1996 because they were a Y2K expert. I'm dating myself, right? And years later, he introduced other attorneys into Accenture, and we gave them more and more business because the attorneys that were driving it were incredible. And a lot of them were women and or minorities. And unbeknownst to us, for years, he was getting 100% of the origination credit 15 years later. So I started to challenge that when it wasn't vogue. The good news is more and more in-house are asking law firms, how does origination credit works? We know that 52% of the general counsel population in the United States has no idea how origination credit is awarded. So back to your theme about data, the first question in-house should be asking law firms is, how does your origination credit work and who's getting it for these matters? And when a law firm says it's none of your business, which they have the right to say, as the buyer of legal services, what I would say is that's fine, but I'm going to give my business to somewhere else. It takes that stick. Once you understand the origination credit, then the next question to ask is, how is business being awarded to this law firm? If Sarah Smith, who's a woman of color, is in the compliance space and she's been driving that business for years, and we now know she's not getting any origination credit, 2 + 2 = 4, we now understand why she's not being compensated fairly, why she may not be an equity partner, why she's not on the compensation committee. And we as the buyer then have the ability to ask questions and basically suggest that Sarah get a piece of that origination credit. Again, it's data-driven, fundamental questions, understand how it works, and then to ask the follow-up questions. And the good news, Jeremy and Julia, is more and more general counsels are talking about this subject with their law firms. This is not going to go away.
Wow. Well, Joel, we're just thrilled that you joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you when we come back to the Q&A. Thanks so much for all of your insights and all of your great work with NamWolf.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
All right, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our next guest. She's the co-founder and managing partner of Culhane Meadows, the nation's largest women-owned full-service law firm. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you both for having me.
Sure, and Kelly, please go ahead, Julia.
Please go ahead, Jeremy.
So yeah, Kelly, as Julia was indicating, you are the manager and the co-founder of Culhane Meadows. We would love to know, more about your background and how you wound up founding what's now the nation's largest women-owned full-service law firm.
Well, thank you. And thank you both for having me and giving us this opportunity. I jokingly said, but it's not a joke, following Joel Stern is a lot of pressure. He's absolutely amazing. But going back to kind of the genesis, at least for me, my background, I was a typical graduate right out of law school, wanted to be in big law, thought I'm going to be a trial lawyer. I'm going to go for it. I'm also going to work 100 hours a week, and I'm going to have a family, and I'm going to have this great marriage, and this is how this is going to roll. So about the time I was up for partner and pregnant with my first child, I started thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to be present in this child's life. And this is just my journey. I have a lot of respect for men and women who can do it. I had 3 kids in 4 years. I retired. And back then that was when you were mommy tracked. And I just decided to kind of mommy track myself. So while the kids were little, I had a sole practice, just a couple of clients. And in the traditional law firm model, I'll just say, when I was hearing Joel speak about the financial element of equity partnership, it never made sense for me. And so even if I hadn't left for personal reasons, I kept thinking there's got to be a better way to compensate attorneys, compensate partners. Why do we have billable quotas? I mean, how is that not in direct conflict with your client who wants you to be as efficient as possible? They don't want you to bill a bunch. They want you to be efficient. So fast forward, my kids are a little more independent. They make fun of me. They learn that, they don't need mom as much as I wish they did. And I found 3 like-minded friends, also big firm lawyers. And we started Culhane Meadows. And we basically took the traditional law firm model and we put it in the clean room. And we stripped away what we felt were all the inefficiencies, all the artificial demands that are placed on partners. We do not have billable quotas. We don't have a minimum rate. We are colorblind, gender blind. We don't have any walls. We have always been work from home or work from a client space since we founded in 2013. So we have been sort of just working our way toward making sure we have created a law firm where you can still represent your large clients, the sophisticated clients, or the mom and pops who you love helping, say, with entrepreneurial endeavors. And in 8 years, we've got over 75 lawyers, all partner level in 11 markets. So I can continue to go on and on, but maybe I'll take a breath. That's my background, though, and the background of how Culhane Meadows was formed.
Well, great. And Joel certainly set a really interesting stage for us all to be considering. And one question that we have for for you from the outset is that as consumers of legal services, will continue seeking diverse talent. We're curious to know what your experience has been with Culhane Meadows, and what you see going forward in 2021 and beyond.
And that is a great question. And I just have to give another shout out to Joel and his entire staff at NAMWolf, because this fall we just participated in interviews with the NAMWolf companies, the members of NAMWolf, and had an incredible amount of interviews. We had opportunities with 50 plus companies, most Fortune 50 and above. And I will just tell you, they were not just checking the box, I think, during those interviews saying, oh, we got to talk to these diverse and minority firms. They asked the hard questions. I love the fact that you guys brought up that we should always discuss origination credit. What I think I've always been a little hesitant to bring up with a client or a potential client is our model, but we have gone full circle and said, hey, there's a reason why last year the top 3 income earners at Culhane Meadows were women, 3 of the 5 actually. There's a reason why out of the 10 top income producers, all equity partner level, the reason there, I guess it was 6 of those were women, is because our model is completely transparent and origination credit lies with the person who brings in that work. So what I found during these interviews was they wanted to know kind of behind the curtain. They wanted to know, how do you pay your lawyers? How do you staff your cases? And we even had a couple of interviews, and I haven't had a chance to tell Joel about this, where the in-house counsel said, hold on, let me get one of my colleagues on the phone. And this is one of the hitting blessings of having to do things virtually this year, because that assistant general counsel patched in her colleague. She saw our talent base. She heard about us. She asked about how we origination credit, all these things. And then we could also talk about our ability, our bandwidth, how much subject matter expertise we have. And another thing I found really amazing was the fact that when I just did the statistics, 50% of our practice chairs are women. So I really do think it comes down to compensation and allowing these companies to see you're not just showing them a bunch of diverse and minority individuals during a pitch. These are the people you hire on a daily basis and who do the work. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but.
No, you raised some great points, Kelly. I'm curious to know what your insight and experience is with companies that offer incentives or financial perks to departments that purchase legal services from firms with diverse legal talent.
Right, that's the carrots and the sticks, right? I mean, we all think carrots work a little bit better, but the companies that have really caught my attention, and I should back up, I was a consumer of legal services. I was outside general counsel of a Tokyo Marine insurance company. And, as a young woman, that was an amazing experience. I learned a lot more than how to run a legal department. I can tell you that there wasn't such thing back then as what I say is the carrots and the sticks. And that is, I think if companies, and I'd like to challenge companies to reach out here as we do budgeting for 2021, not knowing a lot of things. As you're doing your budgeting, why not give a carrot to your business units who can show you that they have used X percentage of legal spend on minority law firms, diverse law firms. And so they know that the stick may come if they don't reach what they told you, what they projected in their budget, then that budget should be decreased. I think there should be some financial, hate to say the word penalty, because I prefer carrots to sticks, but it all does come down to money. And I think what that will do, I don't think these companies don't want to use minority firms. I think what happens is we all do what we're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So we have these awesome interviews, and we all hang up and everybody feels good. And I felt legitimately like these companies really wanted to use Culhane Meadows and they wanted to use the other firms in the Nam Wolf family. But I do wonder if when that next case comes in, the next deal comes in, we're all busy. So they quickly look at their approved counsel list and they're like, oh, let's use Julia. We've used her all the time. We know she's great. She knows equipment leasing. And of course, not a great example because I'd love for them to use Julia, but say Julia's at Hunt Williams or Aiden Gump or Wild Godshaw. Let's use her because we know her. I think these in-house counsels are going to have to take a step back and say, you know what? Let's look at those people we interviewed through the Nam Wolf process, or let's think of these people we've learned about that are hiring diverse and minority partners. Let's use them. Let's give them a shot.
Mm. Can we go under the hood a little bit more on that, Kelly? Because you make this great point, and Joel brought up before, about the incentives for firms to purchase diverse talent. But like what you're bringing up, if you had this long relationship with a given law firm for years and years and years, and then interview Nam Wolf law firms such as Culhane Meadows, and then wind up potentially just going back to the familiarity. Right. What else would you advise? Like the carrot and stick is interesting. I mean, like what else, if you had your druthers, what would you explain? I mean, you've got this tremendous law firm, multiple offices, virtual office throughout the country. So I'm sure you're competitive on rates, because familiarity may also involve higher rates than what Culhane Meadows offers, or parity in rates. So curious to know, what you would advise so people can really pull that trigger and really make a difference.
Right. I would say, I think advising a company, whoever it is within the general counsel, the assistant general counsel ranks, if you're a senior person and you're not necessarily hiring legal counsel, when you're doing your quarterly review, whatever it is that you reach out to your AGCs and you sit around the table, ask them how many firms did you assign work to this month, this quarter, and look at the statistics and say how many of those were minority-owned firms or diverse or otherwise inclusion. Otherwise, how many of those law firms that you hired are ones that are a minority or women-owned or whatever it is. And then for the where my mind was also going is, as a law firm, what should I say to myself? I've had these great interviews. We've had some nice work come in, but when you look at how many interviews and pitches and RFPs, and we could do a whole podcast on RFPs, but when you look at those and then you really look at the ROI, I don't think I'm alone. And I may have some other Nam Wolf family law firms that feel this way. When you go out and put that tremendous effort in, how much of that then in an ROI do you see? Do you get hired? I think companies could do better, and maybe law firms can do better by reaching back out. And even though you feel like a pest, I picked up the phone and said, hey, we had a great talk. Not an email. I picked up the phone and said, it's been a couple of months. I do not want to be a pest. How can I stay front of mind the next time you have a piece of work come in? And I think back to my younger days as an associate, my male mentor, who was incredible. The whole reason he put me in front of his clients, I am convinced, is I felt like I had all this courage as a young associate. I just walked in his office and I was like, I'm tired of being in the back doing chronologies and depot prep. What can I do to get in front of your clients? And he was like, wow. And again, I feel like I need to pull on that type of courage today. So I'm going to challenge myself to pick up the phone, maybe even after this podcast, and say, hey, we had a great talk back in July. I would love to get some work for you. What can I do?
Great. And Kelly, also, I'm so glad you're bringing up that experience that you had, with that partner in that first law firm experience. I'll never forget when I was in law school, as a natural born entrepreneur and heard my corporations professor say, you know what, congratulations, you're not going to see a client for 5 years. And I thought to myself, what are you talking about? This is crazy.
He was right.
And one of the themes of our program today, Kelly, is how law firms can accelerate growth and leadership among their diverse talent. And I was wondering, what advice would you give to that late 20-something, mid 30-something, early 40-something, that is in a law firm, and how do they have that courage to do like what you did and say, you know what? I can write depositions with the best of them. I can write a summary judgment, memo with the best of them, but I deserve to be in front of the client.
Right. And I should back up. I don't know if it was courage or pure stupidity, because when I think back to that conversation, it could have gone either way. What I would say is, and this picks up on what Joel had just said earlier about just financial compensation, I would say if just figure out who gives out the business. And if you are sitting there in your office, man or woman, but you're sitting there and you notice the head partner rolls on down the hall. Well, in this case, it's all virtual, but as we all get back into the office, and you're not the one they're calling on to go to the dinners and the happy hours and the golfing, you need to just walk into that person's office or pick up the phone and call that person, do a Zoom, a team chat, and say, hey, I absolutely love working for you. How do I get more face time in front of the client? I'm not a salesperson, but you've always heard, you miss every shot you don't take. I think if you're just sitting in your office and you're grinding at work and you get the attaboy or attagirl on the head, it's not going to work. I think, and then also I would really say, take a step back and look at the people who are more senior to you. I did say this, and these are people I greatly respect at my old law firm. I thought to myself, I'm like, I don't think I want to be you when I grow up. And the reason I don't want to be you when I grow up is because you are an amazing lawyer. And there's sort of this box that nobody knows how you get compensated. You've got to write an I love me memo or why you should love me memo. I would say if you're sitting there and you're in the middle ranks of raising up in a traditional firm and you're tired and you're frustrated, I would say, look at how they're compensating you. And if it's not a completely open and transparent formula where you know what you need to do to excel, and this goes for men, women, minority, it's for everybody. But I think if you're in a model and in a law firm where compensation is still very subjective, it's just going to be very challenging.
And Kelly, actually, just to add to that, and that overlaps with a theme that we're kind of seeing as well, as the importance, I think, of people within that age group or level within a firm is seeking out a mentor or a sponsor or someone that can kind of either direct you, give you advice, or help make you visible when you make those sort of initiatives that you prompt yourself.
Right. And, it's a responsibility, I think, and I take it on. I know my co-founders share in that. I pick up a lot of phone calls. I respond to a lot of emails where people may not be a candidate for us or lateral, but it's this is where I am. I have a call on Friday and this woman is like, do you have any ideas for me? And I feel like it's not that it's pro bono, but we all do things that are just the right thing. That doesn't make me a great person. It doesn't make anyone a great person. But I would say if you're in a position where you have gone out and done something that's been really tough, and then mentor people, even if they're not in your own organization. It's like paying it forward. It's like buy a cup of coffee for somebody, make their day. But I do feel like attorneys in particular, I was in a rut. I mean, I really was. And I was just fortunate enough really to have started my family. I hate to say it, but it gave me the excuse to say, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do something different because this is not for me. And, one thing I'd mention at our firm, every January, every partner at the firm has the opportunity to be the highest income earner in the firm. It is always within your control. And that's because it's a formula-based compensation system. And I just can't harp enough on, we're talking about compensation and financial. And as Joel said, data, you've got to look at the data where you're practicing law and figure out if you're going to be able to really, how low is the ceiling?
Right.
Well, great. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on developing Culhane Meadows into the nation's largest women-owned full-service law firm, and we look forward to seeing you back on Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, so next, Julia, we're going to change the format a little bit. We're going to have a dual interview. We're going to be joined right now by Stuart Hirsch of Strategic Relationships and Barbara Johnson of BL Johnson Law and out of Washington, D.C. And Stuart is in the Boston area. I've known Stuart for a number of years, so very happy to be able to give just a bit of Stuart's great bio. Stuart is a business development and executive coach who coaches and leads workshops for lawyers and other professionals. Stuart provides leadership coaching for law firm leaders and Fortune 500 legal executives, including many women and diverse individuals, where Stuart's coaching helps his clients advance professionally. And we'll hear a lot more about that when we start talking in this interview, Stuart. And Barbara of BL Johnson Law. Barbara, after working 14 years with a global law firm, in 2015, Barbara created BL Johnson Law. Barbara has over 30 years of practicing management side labor and employment law. Barbara has extensive experience in counseling clients on the full gamut of employment issues, including Me Too type complaints. So Stuart and Barbara, welcome, and we look forward to jumping into it with the both of you.
Thank you, Jeremy and Julia.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Stuart, I'm gonna throw the first question out at you, and maybe we'll have Barbara follow up with your take as well. So why do you think that consumers of legal services have begun demanding diverse legal teams? And how will this trend continue?
So I'm going to change that question a little bit, if I may, because I think it's clear that they have begun doing it. The question is, how much have they begun doing it? And how much has really happened, and what's happening going forward. So second part of that question is fine. I think really the issue is that there are some that have. There's a lot of companies out there. My background, is I practiced law for 20 years, both in firms and in-house. And in-house, I was with a lot of big companies. I got to pick lawyers, manage outside counsel, and many of the things that Joel was talking about earlier as an in-house lawyer. I was inside as a contractor, about 15 companies with the right to choose counsel on many matters. And back when I was doing it, of course, it wasn't even on the radar screen to think about diverse people. We didn't even look at it, think about it, or anything else. That's changed in the last bunch of years. But I think that Kelly said it best. I mean, what happens is people are doing what they do, which is they get into their work, they do what they're doing, and then they will make a decision based on their default way of doing things. There are a number of big companies who have actually looked into diversity and are doing things about diversity. Joel's described a bunch that have done it. I know that I wrote an article about for Inside Counsel magazine and really a bunch of years ago about their program, which at the time was called Project Ola, which got some of the older lawyers, older male lawyers, to work with some of the younger lawyers in firms that are diverse. And so there are companies that are really taking this proactively and providing statistics and so on, metrics, in order to do the right thing on this, or do the thing that we all are trying to say here is the right thing. But the reality is, when push comes to shove, the in-house counsel that have to make these decisions, many of whom their heart's in the right place, when they go to do it, it's very different, because there are the law firms that have the expertise that they say they need for a particular matter. There is not a diverse lawyer to do it, or the firms say there's not a diverse lawyer to do it. I know Barbara's going to have a lot to say about that. And in the smaller companies, I'm not sure how much it's on the radar screen. I do a lot of work with in-house counsel as an executive coach, and on the other side, I work with lawyers in firms who are seeking the work. And the stories are pretty much the same. The in-house lawyers often want to get diverse lawyers, and the external lawyers, of course, who are diverse want to get the work, but they don't always match. So I'm going to stop there, and I know Barbara's got a few things to share and add to this, but this is the reality that I'm experiencing.
Thank you, and thank you again for having me participate in this presentation. Just one addition to the bio is I'm also counsel with Potter and Murdoch, which is a NAMWOLF firm, and so I've had an opportunity to have the guidance and leadership of the great Joel Stern as well. But with respect to the question, I think most companies have always, over the last 10, 15 years, had some concerns about diversity and inclusion, right? And so they had started the process of demanding more diverse teams. I've seen a number of RFPs where diversity is asked about and considered. Some companies have had a diversity scorecard that their outside counsel have been asked to complete on an annual basis. And so there's been an interest, but the reality is there's been an interest, but consistent with the numbers that you showed at the beginning of the program, there really has been very, very little progress in a lot of ways, notwithstanding the billions of dollars that have been spent on diversity and inclusion programs. But 2020 has changed all of that. I think with the murder of George Floyd and the reaction of corporate America by issuing hundreds of statements, actually using the phrase racism and institutional racism, I think there is a renewed interest in the topic. And I think that corporate law departments are now under even more pressure, scrutiny, to identify diverse partners in law firms to provide legal services. So I do see that there's always been some interest in this topic. I don't think there's been a lot of progress. I think 2020 is the tipping point, and I think that we will see a lot more interest in this area. The other thing that I think is propelling this change in a way is millennials. I mean, the reality is millennials have a very different view of diversity and inclusion than older folks like myself do. They're very impatient and they're insisting. So I've worked with a number of startups, and I'm always surprised by how progressive the in-house counsel are with those startup companies in terms of we really do want to use diverse counsel and very active in seeking them.
Yeah, and I can even add to this as more another piece of this trend are as more and more women and diverse lawyers are moving in-house and having positions in-house to hire lawyers. I think that there's a larger movement or a bigger movement to hire more lawyers that are diverse. And so they are much more cognizant than back when I was practicing law. And I think that's because they themselves are diverse and they're paying attention to it. And they're bringing that way of thinking into the companies in which they work.
Great. So that's very optimistic, which is terrific. But what it also makes me think of, though, is the statistic from the 2019 NALP data that Julia shared with us at the beginning, which is that we've seen over the years increasing rises in percentages of associates among women and minority attorneys, but it's just not carrying over to the partnership level. So what do you see? And Barbara, let's hope. I mean, it was an awful year in so many ways, but if what you're saying is that this could be providing a tipping point, and with millennials who are outnumbering in law firms, millennials are outnumbering boomers now.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is the reality. And of course, in the business field too, millennials are out there. They're the ones that are starting the startups and will be demanding diverse legal talent. But still, change is hard. So Stuart, next question for you is, what do you see as the impediments for firms to develop and grow diverse talent?
Yeah, so I think there are really 4 impediments that we need to look at. One is recruiting. and that is bringing the diverse talent in. They often may look in the wrong places as to where to find them. I've heard too many times that we can't find diverse talent in the areas in which we're looking. So I'm going to leave that there. I know Barbara's got something to add to that. Inclusion is probably the second and probably the largest area for improvement, because it's hard to bring in diverse talent if they don't feel included. Kelly was describing that earlier when she was talking about the people passing by the offices, to step out and say something, or when bringing somebody to a dinner. If people do not feel included, they're not going to want to stay, which of course is what sends them to their in-house roles, or on the other hand, will have them just say nothing and move into the background. The next area is related to that, which is the assignments, giving them assignments that will help them to grow, and then the last area is leadership development, giving women and other diverse lawyers leadership positions that actually have meaning. There's an entire book that talks about, or maybe it's just an article that talks about why women and others are given positions that do not result in growth, and so it happens. And so making sure we as a community are paying attention to what leadership opportunities are given to people. Oftentimes having diverse individuals handling diversity and inclusion in their firms is a way to just, okay, you go do that, and without necessarily giving them the power to do it. So I think there's much more that needs to be done in all these areas.
Great. Barbara, please.
Yes, I think the biggest impediment is around culture, and a failure to recognize that without a change in culture, inclusion is not going to be accomplished. And you can continue to hire diverse talent and continue to lose diverse talent because you don't have a culture that is inclusive and welcoming and creating that sense of belonging. So recruiting is certainly a challenge, and for some of the ways that Stuart, there are ways to address the recruiting issue, looking at other places that you may not have thought about for diverse talent is one of those. Understanding what the barriers are to identifying diverse talent. But it's the inclusion piece that I think is the biggest challenge that law firms face. And unless that is addressed, minority diverse talent is going to continue to just leave law firms because they're not welcoming places.
Great. Go ahead, Julia, please.
That's okay. It's a great point, Barbara. Thank you. What do you think that white male partners can do in terms of, and we discussed this before, mentorship, allyship, sponsorship, to help diverse lawyers succeed?
I think first of all is to educate themselves on the issues. And that sounds simple, but many partners in law firms have never thought about race, never thought about the barriers that exist for women in law firms, except in a very tangential way. So educating yourself so that you understand what the issues really are and can start to help removing those barriers. And then once you do that, offering to mentor people, not necessarily on a mentor diverse talent in your firm, not necessarily in a formal way, but even in informal ways, in terms of reaching out, having conversations, finding out what's going on with people, because it's very easy to gravitate toward people who are like ourselves. And that in and of itself can be part of the challenge. And so I think reverse mentoring, recognizing how much you can learn from diverse folks within your firm and using that as an opportunity, not for them to learn that's exclusively from you, but for you to learn from them as well.
So it's a two-way street.
It is very, very much a two-way street.
And that program that I mentioned earlier that a company has done to have their senior lawyers in-house mentor outside lawyers is one way to do it. They were both learning from that program. But there are other things they can do too. And there's a great book called Forget a Mentor, Get a Sponsor. And that's not to denigrate from what Barbara said, because I think mentoring is extremely important. But there are a number of things people can do. One is be an ally. When one sees an individual, an associate, or even a partner, not being treated in a way that everyone else should, or everyone should be treated, say something. And there are times I can't believe it still happens, but I hear women saying that they are asked to get the coffee because when they walk in the room, for some reason, there's this expectation. And I've heard that men have said, and it's usually a white male who gets it, who says, "I'll get the coffee," or "Why would you ask her to get the coffee?" There are people who would come out and say, "You wouldn't ask a man to do that, or you wouldn't ask anybody else to do that." So speaking up and being an ally for that person is really important. And also sponsoring even what Kelly said, that there was an older male that helped her grow. And I would say of all the, I've worked with a number of Black women who, both in firms and in house, and they've usually described a white male who took them under their wings and showed them the way. And that possibly be because there was no older Black female who could do that. So there are people who are doing it, and be that person. That's what they can do. They can be that person who's going to take someone under their wing and treat them the same as they would as if the person looked just like them.
Yeah.
Well, great. And Barbara, we've asked a few of the guests. I mean, if you were in front of law firms and you've had the vantage point of working for a global firm, you've worked in-house, now you're operating your own, smaller firm, and affiliated with another firm. If you had your druthers to advise on inclusion, and I believe you consult on this, what would you advise? That reverse mentorship is fascinating. Maybe that's a term of art. Never heard of it, but it's fascinating. Love to hear more about what you would advise firms about inclusion, and including whether that reverse mentorship, how that could play into it.
I do think the reverse mentorship is extremely important, but as I said earlier, the most important aspect of all of this is to create an environment where people feel welcome. And in terms of what environment I would prefer, it's any environment where I feel welcome and valued. And the advice that I give to newer associates now, which I may not have given in the past, is if you are in a place that does not value you, do not stay. You should not stay in a place where you're not valued, where you're not given opportunities, because you're too good for that. And I think that is the way that associates are going to look at the environment that they're in. So it doesn't matter to me whether it's big firm, small firm, NAMWOR firm, whatever. It's being in that environment where you feel respected and as if you can make a contribution and bring value.
Well, great. Barbara Stewart, thank you so much for joining us. And just sort of a program note to people, we see that people are putting comments in YouTube. So all of our guests will be back for the Q&A, and we encourage people, please challenge us. Post some questions for our great guests to address during the Q&A that we're going to start at about 1:15.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
It's my absolute pleasure to introduce next to you Sean McNallis, who is a senior practice advisor at Atticus Advantage, a consulting firm for attorneys. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Julia. It's great to be here and a privilege to be on a panel with all of these wonderful people. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Please tell us a little bit about your role at Atticus Advantage.
So at Atticus, we really specialize in focusing on small, solo and mid-sized firms. We say that we teach as consultants, and we work with a wide range of people across the United States and Canada. We really focus on everything that they were not taught in law school. The marketing, the managing, the motivating, leadership aspects, hiring, firing, time management, work-life balance. So those are the areas in which we focus. So my perspective, I think the perspective I can lend today is the small firm, the sole practitioners, the women and the minorities who are really branching out, hitting the glass ceiling, recognizing that how things are run in these larger firms is not a good fit for them, starting out on their own.
So let's follow up a little bit on this glass ceiling that you're referencing. You believe that women who hit the glass ceiling are in firms traditionally run by men are inspired to open their own firms, spurred on by this lack of opportunity in those traditional firms. So why do you think this is so?
So I would like to do a survey and actually get the data on this. Right now, I only have anecdotal evidence supported by my observations of working with, female firm owners for the last 20 years. It's a story that I've heard repeatedly. And so it makes me believe that, there's a serious trend here. And to me, it just demonstrates that women are taking control. It's much like Kelly Culhane. Women are getting frustrated. They're feeling not included. Comments were made about the compensation system, the origination credits, the mysteriousness of the compensation system. There's many motivating factors, including women to be wanting to be starting a family and having a family. So many motivating factors, and these women are reacting by starting their own small firms and growing them very successfully. So to me, I call it the accidental upside, but it's a happy thing. It's something that I think reflects the extreme adaptability of women entrepreneurs, because that's what they are.
Great. And here we're going to change up our format a little bit because, Sean, I know you're so much used to being on the consulting side and interviewing lawyers and whatnot. And so our next point that we want to speak with you about is the role of law firm diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I know, Julia, you're very humble, but Julia is the leader at Moore & Hawk for their diversity inclusion program on women in the firm. So, Sean, I think you've got a few questions that you'd like to pose to Julia, please.
I was fascinated by what Julia does, and I think I'm very interested to see what has been the impact, and has your firm been able to see what kind of results are they seeing so far from your initiatives?
Absolutely. I mean, I have been seeing a trend amongst firms of diversity and inclusion initiatives separately from women's initiatives. But we use our women's initiative at our firm, we use as a platform to offer advice to women, to provide them opportunities to set up mentoring or sponsorships or advice that really sometimes pertain more to women, to help them advance and to grow both professional skills in networking, and make available to them as many resources as we can, both collectively and on an individual basis. And in that, we've also have our male allies that we try not to be too inclusive, and we try to open it up to the males of our firm, not only for our benefit, but to also further educate them. We obviously have a lot of support from them as well, but we know that collectively is how we need to work to be able to make progress. And that way, we have seen a number of trends. We've helped our females within the firm grow professionally and be exposed to more clients and given more opportunities and leadership roles. So it's definitely played a part, and I am seeing that trend amongst other firms as well.
It's very exciting. Now, do you agree with the earlier speaker that said that this is a little bit of a generational issue, and that as more millennial men enter into firms and into the workplace in general, that maybe this issue ages out a little bit because, it may be older men are sort of holding on to the stereotypes a little bit more than younger men would.
Absolutely. It's as you're seeing the landscape change, I think that is why we're seeing the repercussions that we're seeing now. And definitely having the millennials that are more open to these kinds of diversity initiatives certainly plays, I think, a big role. And at least from what I've been seeing as well.
Now, I've noticed a trend among the female attorneys that we work with that this pandemic has had a disproportionately harsh effect on them, their productivity, their lifestyle, their stress level. It's been extraordinarily difficult for them. What are your thoughts and observations on that from your own experience and that of your firm?
So I've actually can see it cut both ways. I've seen the pandemic have a negative effect on women because we not only have had the responsibilities of our demanding professions and working full time, but on top of it, we have children that, for those that have children, being homeschooled or managing everything at home. And you certainly don't have the delineation of hours anymore of when you're in the office versus when you're at home. You're kind of playing and using and wearing two hats at the same time at all hours. So in that sense, a lot of our responsibilities as women and also women who are parents as well, our responsibilities have extended in hours. So my obligations for work during the daytime have also now been expanded into the nighttime, or at least I have to wait until my son goes to bed before I can start working again. And that leads to 2, 3 a.m. nights, which, not everybody's able to handle, but certainly when you need to meet deadlines, you do what you have to do. But at the same time, there's also a little more flexibility that the pandemic has offered because we have that flexibility to be able to work when we can because of the other obligations that we're handling. So factoring that in, a lot of people can say that the pandemic has had only a negative effect, but there's actually some positive things that have the silver lining that's kind of come out of it as well.
And Sean, if we can take the question back on you, because with Atticus, you've shared with us that Atticus has internally its own women-owned law firm, like affinity group. What are you observing on that question of how the pandemic is impacting women attorneys? What are you observing and clients of Atticus? What are they telling you?
Certainly high levels of stress that they're coping with as they struggle with managing homeschooling. If they're not the owner of their own firm, we're hearing from even paralegals and associates that being held to the same levels of productivity, those same productivity standards at this time is creating a lot of additional stress for them. I agree with Julia in that, it's forced the acceptance of a lot of remote work and flexibility in when, women are getting their work done. but it has created a lot of stress. Now, if they're the owner of their own firm, they're certainly in a different position. They have more control. They set their own productivity standards. They obviously allow huge flexibility in when they themselves are working, but certainly stressful for everyone. I bring it up, and I was asking Julia because I read statistics that said that women's progress in law firms was temporarily set back after the 2008, 2009 recession situation. And then, it took female attorneys a while to recover from that. So I was wondering if she thinks it can actually set back women who may be on a good track, or perhaps we're on a really good track. Is this going to throw them back? Is this going to be tougher to recover from?
Look, I've certainly heard a number of women that have, during this whole pandemic, considered leaving the profession altogether because it's just too much to handle. And I think that one perspective that you have to have is to remember the fact that pre-COVID, it was a full day of work followed by hours of work at home. So it's not like it was any different. We were still had the obligations that, society and trends tend to put on us. But with daycares closed, with remote learning, with homeschooling, mothers are more likely than fathers to be spending an extra 20 hours a week on housework and childcare. And that's not data that you can ignore. It's got to be done somewhere by somebody. And that's kind of what I was getting to at the point that, and some of us end up sacrificing sleep because of it, because that's just how the trend is. So it may drive some people out of the profession altogether, or it may slow the process. There are senior level women that are also under intense pressure at work and at home, and they're typically held to higher performance standards and likely to be judged more harshly. They're 1.5 times as likely as men at the same level to think about downshifting or leaving, and that's the top reason that's cited often is burnout.
Yeah, I agree. It's sustainable. And so, of course, we all hope that it's coming to an end very soon. So, Jeremy, I'll turn it back to you. I know you want to get started with the question and answer portion.
Sure. So Sean, thank you so much for joining us as our last guest, but you're going to come off and then come right back on. So okay. Thank you, Sean, so much. And Julie and I will just share a few words, and then we'll start our Q&A.
Thanks, Sean.
So, Julia, thanks so much. That was a really engaging group of professionals.
Everybody brought great points, and Ray had very good insight on all the topics that we've covered today. Yeah,
I agree. And we're going to welcome everybody back in. For anybody, will age all of us that remembers Hollywood Squares. This is going to be our Hollywood Squares sort of round robin of Q&A. Encourage people in the audience. Feel free on YouTube. You can submit a question to all of us. I'll kick it off. Everybody made such important statements, but we want to make sure that people are coming away from this program with our two themes and the overall topic that we presented today, that we're going to address them. Otherwise, all of our law school professors and professors generally will look down on us. So we had the case to finally diversify law firm partners in the U.S. And the one theme that I kept thinking about as everyone was talking is, how can law firms accelerate the growth in leadership among their diverse talent? And Barbara, you made such a poignant point when you said we're at this tipping point. We were all living through the coronavirus pandemic. The George Floyd matter happened. during this time period, the Me Too movement is very much among us. BLM very much among us. For each of you, we'd love to hear your thoughts on, how can law firms accelerate that growth in leadership? People want this. The clients want it. The partners in law firms, they want it. Corporations want it. So we want to ask each of you your thoughts, some direct advice on, how firms can accelerate that growth and finally make those statistics that Julia shared with us at the beginning go up to where they really should be by now. And Barbara, if it's okay, I'd love to start with you.
Great. I think the way to make real progress is for firm leadership to give the same attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion that it does to any other initiative. And, we're very creative. We can solve tremendous problems. 2020 has shown us that we can figure out how to work from home on a dime. Mm-hmm. We can do anything we put our minds to, and yet somehow diversity and inclusion has been the responsibility of the diversity and inclusion officer, or you leave it to the women and the people of color to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. If leadership makes it a priority, gives it the resources that it needs, we can make real sustained change. But it's only if leadership is prepared to create the same kind of strategy you would do with any other kind of business imperative. Create a strategy, do the quantitative analysis, the qualitative analysis, and figure out how to get where we need to be.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so the next Hollywood Square I'll pick on is Joel, please.
Well, Barbara's answer is my answer 100% because it is the answer. When you go into a law firm and you meet with their diversity inclusion legal committee, and all you see is people under 35 and minority and or of color and or women, that's a problem. You need everybody in the room. So inclusion is the key. But let me give it to you from the different perspective. We talked about carrots or sticks. Every buyer of legal services needs to demand that law firms make this a priority and needs to use both carrots and sticks to reward law firms that are doing the right thing and to punish law firms that aren't doing the right thing. We control, in-house counsel controls the purse strings, and we have to exercise it appropriately and with judgment, but we need to exercise it and we need to do it in total, not just one or two in-house counsel. If we do that and law firms do what Barbara's suggesting they do, we have an opportunity to truly make this a tipping point.
Great. And Stuart, please.
I'm just going to pile on to Barbara and Joel on this. I think that from the law firm perspective, making it very clear that there is a benefit, a financial benefit to inclusion and to diversity and to bringing people into matters that are diverse and to giving credit to people that are diverse is going to help the pocketbook. And I think that making that clear and sharing that information with people in a way that they will get it will help people to realize that they need to be more cognizant and more proactive.
Terrific. And Sean, please, we'd love to hear your insights.
I was speaking with a woman attorney recently about her encounter with the glass ceiling, and she said, I didn't encounter the glass ceiling. And I said, what? How is that possible? And she said, because I was a producer. She said, because I was such a heavy producer, the leadership of the firm paid attention to me. And it was my way of showing leadership by my productivity. Now, I'd say there's been other attorneys, female attorneys that we've worked with who took the path of client development. If they can demonstrate that they have client development skills, I liked what Kelly said earlier about how she went in and she approached the partnership early on. Demonstrating both productivity and origination skills. Those are paths to power if you're in a larger organization and they're not as clued into the inclusivity and the need for diversity. To me, those are two pathways.
Great. And Kelly, please, love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, they've already been said, my esteemed co-panelists. The one thing that really struck me throughout this entire podcast is I think firms and companies, firms are trying, they have inclusion committees, they have diversity chairs, and just like Joel said, they're usually people of color, they're younger. That's great. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't have a diversity chair in these committees, but what I would do is look at the number of minorities and women you hire, and then look at your partners who are really the highest paid equity partners and the people on the management committee and the comp committee. And I am positive you're going to see a huge difference between those two numbers. So I would sit down and fix your compensation system because it is broken. And the way you can do that is what everyone had just said, introduce women, introduce minorities to the clients, take them on the next meeting. Do not just give them a brief to write or a memo to write. They've got to get in front of the clients because everybody knows that traditional law, the purse strings, whoever has the business, they've got all the power.
Great, please, Julia.
I think it's important, everything that everybody said, everybody's raised great points, but I think if we need to take a step back and not just see why it's, the reason why it's important to do all of this, not just from a profitability standpoint, but the reasons why you really want a diverse team as your outside legal counsel, for instance. I think it's important, and you see the trend that greater diversity in law firms will lead to better decision-making, work product, results. You have statistics where you've been seeing corporations increasingly requesting that, for instance, senior women litigators serve as first chair on trials, based on research that female partners are more likely than male partners to get courtroom wins. You're seeing other statistics that say mixed gender legal teams significantly outperform from those made of only one gender. And why is that important is because you really need to understand the fact that when everybody in the room is from the same group, it's easy to agree with one another. You need to be able to include people with different experiences, with different perspectives, those people that challenge your ideas, that challenge the focus, the themes, and the way a case will play out in front of a jury, for instance, that will lead to much better results.
Great, thank you. And I'll just share from my vantage point of operating senior attorney match, I'll take a 30,000-foot view and just point out that we have a generational change in front of us. That is that as boomer attorneys will be retiring over the next 5 to 15 years, those origination credits that Joel discussed earlier in the program, those attorneys will be retiring, and it presents a generational opportunity for law firms across the country to transition client relationships, those relationships that Kelly is saying are so key. And I think we all agree that the relationship with the client is absolutely key. Those transitions can happen by transitioning to diverse talent within law firms and recruiting for that talent. And it's a tremendous opportunity that the profession faces over the next 5 to 15 years as boomer attorneys will retire. Okay, so we've got a couple great questions from our audience. So we're going to post the first one. So this one comes from the audience saying that this person, as a business owner, struggles with emphasizing business prosperity over the right thing to do. And Joel, my sense is, and I can already sort of see your face as you read that one, that this is geared very much towards you. You and I have talked about this, and would love to have you address it, please.
Yeah, I have a CLE that I give to corporate legal groups titled Diversity and Inclusion in the Legal Profession, a Business and Moral Imperative. And if you look at the issue of D&I in the legal profession over the last at least 35 years, we went from arguing one versus arguing the other. For years, we argued it's the right thing to do. Then we solely focused on it's the smart thing to do. Today, we are smart enough to know it's not binary. If I can go into a law firm or go into a corporation and say, we have normative reasons to do this, and it's a smart thing to do, and I can prove through data that this will put you in a competitive, advantageous position, it will sell. So the reality is you can go on the internet and you can look at the Harvard Business Review, or you can look at McKinsey reports. You can see the data that shows that this sells. But as Julia and others articulated, it not only sells from a purely dollar perspective, but it's going to get you to better decision-making and better results. It's going to make your clients happier. And there's that normative reason as well. If you combine them all together, you're going to be able to sell this to anybody that will listen.
Great. And Julia, I think you'll have some points on this too. I mean, you and I have talked about this, and it's what you were just mentioning before too, is that diversity, and this was one of the comments that we got from YouTube today. I'll just share with everyone. I want to make sure I find it. Nicole Reeves. So I'll do a shout out to Nicole. You know, where Nicole says diversity should be deemed as a competitive advantage for firms. That's a really powerful statement. And Julie, I'm wondering if you could speak to the question as well.
Absolutely. It goes back to the point that I was making before, that adding that different perspective allows you to have better decision making, to have a group with more diverse perspectives and challenges, and which will lead to better results. And another point that somebody else raised is diversity is not just race and gender. It is a diverse perspective, and you're not going to get that unless it, in more often than not, comes from someone of a diverse background.
Great. So we're just about done with our program. We've got one more question from another person on YouTube, and this is a question which is fascinating in terms of recruiters. So we'll just see for that question to show up on the screen. And do we have any suggestions for law firm recruiters other than making sure to present diverse candidates? And here, I'm not exactly sure who we should start with. Joel, my sense is to start with you again, but I think we should also hear Stuart's voice on this too.
I think I'd rather hear Joel's voice. I
love your voice, Stuart. I'm just going to make one point. There was a CEO of a very large bank a couple months ago that basically said, I can't find the black talent. And you saw what happened with response to that remark. Open your eyes. What I would tell recruiters to do, and I think the law firms are ready, when you go to Duke University and you see these incredible students and you want to bring them onto your law firm, walk 10 minutes to North Carolina Central University, a historically black college university. Talk to the top 12% or 15% of those kids. They have climbed mountains that I've never even seen. They deserve a chance. The biggest way to increase the pipeline is to expand where you're looking. But that's only 50% of the equation. The other part of the equation is how do you embrace that diversity? How do you make sure those gaps narrow rather than get greater as their career progresses? But please, please, please go to other law schools. A great one for corporations. If you don't hire first-year lawyers, bring in 1Ls that are minority and women. Expose them to your law firms. They fall in love with those students. The next year they bring them in as 2Ls. They've now hired a woman and or a minority they may not have even looked at because they didn't meet the criteria, GPA or the right law school. There's so many incredible things we can do to expand the pipeline. We just got to focus on it and make it systemic and institutional.
Now I feel better. I can answer my part of it. Take what Joel said. Take what everybody else said in this call, and think about it from a cultural perspective. The recruiter can do a lot more. They can even show this recording to people, and give them the reasons. We talked earlier about, is it financial, or is it financial, or there are all these other reasons for diversity. There's a lot of reasons for diversity, and different things appeal to different people. And what I think is really important is that the people that are actually doing the interviewing, because the recruiters certainly can present diverse candidates if they look for them. So obviously telling them to look for them, but the question is anything other than making sure to present them. So assuming they're presenting diverse individuals and going to the right places to find them, then the next thing is how do they convince or help the firm or the company even to actually hire a diverse individual, and that's to give them the information, that the kinds of things that we're sharing here.
Great. And then Barbara, will have you comment on this as well, and then Julie and I will finish up. Please, Barbara.
Sure. I think one of the things that recruiters can do is to ensure that you are not perpetuating stereotypes around diverse talent. In other words, whenever someone talks about qualified and a diverse talent, that means that they're creating stereotypes, right? I mean, why are those two even tied together except for hysterical notions of diversity? So I think recruiters can do a great deal in terms of ensuring that diverse talent is given a fair shake.
Well, terrific. Well, on behalf of Julia and me, thank you so much to the guests, Julia, for you co-moderating, USA 500 Clubs for coming up with this concept of a turning point workshop. Such valuable advice and insights from everyone today, and just really proud to have the opportunity to spend this time with all of you. Thank you. Julia, please.
Thank you, everybody. It's been very insightful. I'm glad I could share a little bit of my own experience and what I've been seeing, and looking forward to seeing the next wave.